What's good? It's Woog. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holiday. We just concluded Naoya the Monster Inoue versus Marlon Tapales for the Super Bantamweight Undisputed Champ status. And the Monster, Naoya Inoue, scores a 10th round knockout over Marlon Tapales. And this was a pretty exciting fight, a very entertaining fight. I suspect that Marlon Tapales did better than most thought that he would do. I think that most saw this fight as being relatively non-competitive, which I seldom buy that. You know, sometimes you'll get a fight that appears non-competitive. I mean, let's be honest, the unification match when Naoya Inoue stepped up to Super Bantamweight to challenge multiple belt holder Stephen Fulton, that at that time undefeated, that fight turned out to be non-competitive. It was very competitive on paper, but when you saw the fight play out, I mean, Naoya Inoue had one of the performances of the year against Stephen Fulton. And this fight against Tapales did not come to lie down. He came to compete. You know, he showed you every bit of fight that he has in him. The Monster just proved to be too much with, and scored the 10th round knockout, becoming only the second male fighter to become undisputed champ in two different divisions, the other being Terrence Crawford. And with this win, you really have to consider Naoya Inoue one of the fighters of the year for 2023. I think that the conversation is going to come down to the Monster, Naoya Inoue, Devin Haney, David Benavidez, and I think you would have to still include Terrence Crawford, even though he had just that one fight in the year, because Crawford probably had the performance of the year for 2023, and it was a devastation and domination over Errol Spence. You at least have to put him in that conversation for fighter of the year, even though the other three guys I mentioned, Inoue, Benavidez, and Haney, had at least two fights apiece. And if you consider 2 fights ago for Inoue, where he became the undisputed champ at bantamweight, about a calendar year ago against Paul Butler. He's got the Paul Butler win. He's got, again, the domination and destruction of Stephen Fulton about a half a year later. And now he's got this 10th round knockout over Marlon Tapales to become, basically becoming 2-division undisputed champ within a calendar year, within 12 months of each other, even though only 2 of those fights were in 2023 technically. But yeah, this was a pretty good fight. The first 2 rounds were, Tapales being pretty patient and kind of probing with the lead right hand, because Tapales is a southpaw, and then you saw Inoue trying to counter when Tapales would extend with that lead hand. And Jamel Herring, who was a part of this ESPN Plus broadcast, was pointing out that Inoue was keeping his lead foot on the outside of Tapales' lead foot, so that when Tapales would over pursue, or not even really over pursue, but would come in with the jab and extend himself, it would give Inoue opportunities to counter with his straight right hand. But for the first few rounds, you saw that Tapales was doing a good job at, keeping his backhand high. So again, Tapales, a southpaw, was keeping his left hand up, so that when Inoue would throw that lead right hand, which Inoue is one of the most blessed punchers in the sport. I mean, he's got no wind up in his punch. He's able to let knockout level power punches go just on a whim, like as if he was throwing a jab with his power punches. That's how quickly and unexpectedly some of those punches are coming out. But Tapales did a really good job at keeping that backhand up, even in the middle and late rounds. Now, in the 3rd round, you saw the intensity start to pick up. Tapales started throwing some more punches to Inoue's body, which I thought that was an interesting angle. You don't see Inoue get work to the body a whole lot. I saw Maloney a few fights ago try to do it. Some people have tried to do it. Usually, obviously nobody's defeated the Monster Inoue yet. But I thought that it was a smart strategy for Tapales to let his lead hand go, especially to the body. And even when he would let his backhand go, it would often be to the body. I thought Tapales was scoring some interesting looking uppercuts, splitting the guard, sometimes the high-ish guard of Naoya Inoue. So Tapales was doing some effective things in there. Now, he ran into trouble once Inoue started to open up and started to really blister and rip Tapales to the body with his lead left hand. So you know how I was mentioning Inoue letting his right hand go, trying to either split the guard or trying to catch Tapales, who was keeping that backhand at home, picking off a lot of Inoue's right hands, that, if he didn't keep that backhand up, this would have been a short night because those punches would have been coming through a lot more consistently earlier, and Tapales would have gotten hurt and probably dropped and stopped if he wasn't so diligent about keeping that backhand up. But Inoue started to rip Tapales with Inoue's lead left hand, started throwing left hooks to the body, and then he started to open up to Tapales' body. You started seeing Tapales start to back up, and he got dropped in the 4th round. At that point, I thought that the writing was on the wall, but then you saw Tapales start to battle back in the 5th and 6th rounds. And by the way, if you see me looking down, I'm looking at the index card that I was taking notes on. If you ever wondered what some of my in-fight index cards or some of my notes look like, they look a little something like this. You can see where I'm scoring the fight, but I'm also taking the notes by round as I'm watching some of these fights. I don't do that for all the fights that I watch. I do it for some. But you started to see Tapales battle back in the 5th and 6th rounds, although I gave Inoue those rounds as well. So at this point, 6 rounds in, I've got Inoue winning all of the rounds, even though the 1st and 2nd round were competitive and the 3rd round was interesting. Again, Tapales got dropped in the 4th round, and then he started to battle back and had success in the 5th and 6th rounds, but not enough success to where I could give him the round over Inoue. And I thought that even though Tapales started to battle back in the 5th round, you started to still see body language-wise, I thought that I saw him weakening. But you also started seeing avenues of success with Tapales increasingly throwing more uppercuts that were landing, and even Tapales' lead hand was throwing like a counter hook that started to catch Inoue in the 6th and 7th rounds. So the 7th round was the only round that I gave to Tapales. I thought Tapales won the 7th round. Again, he was keeping that backhand up. So when Inoue would start to throw that right hand, you started to see Tapales take a step back and start to roll with the punch with his backhand up. So there were a lot of Inoue right hands that were not landing, or that were getting partially blocked or totally blocked. So I gave Tapales the 7th round. I thought Tapales was landing some nice jabs that were rocking Inoue's head back a bit. So he had success there. Again, he had some nice success with his lead right hand hooks, and again with the uppercut. So I gave him the 7th round. 8th round was a competitive round. I thought that Tapales won the first half of the 8th round, but I thought that Inoue did enough when he started doubling up with the right hand. So as Tapales would take a step back, pick the first right hand off, Inoue would throw a second right hand right behind it. So he was throwing 2 consecutive right hands. And often when that first one wasn't getting through, the second one would get through more cleanly. Even if it was still partially blocked, you started to see that it was having an impact on Tapales. And at the same time, Inoue was also finding opportunities to go to Tapales' body. They were both working each other's bodies in this fight. And I thought Tapales did some decent things in the 9th round, still gave that round to Inoue. And then in the 10th round, Inoue again was letting go with a double right hands. You started, you were seeing in the 8th, 9th, and 10th, you were seeing Tapales really pour out the last of his energy. You started to see, you were seeing him weaken over time, and you were wondering how much more he could take of, the shots to the body specifically, because you started seeing Tapales backing up when Inoue would start, or continue to throw those blistering shots with both hands to the body, especially with Inoue's lead left hand. But he started doubling up, continued to double up with the right hand. He ended up throwing a right hand that split the guard and got through on Tapales, and that dropped him. That ended up finishing the fight. In the 10th round, you saw Tapales kind of on his hands and knees trying to get up, but it just seemed like he didn't have the legs. He didn't have the any more of the energy, and he was more or less finished. He stayed down, and so this was a knockout, 10th round knockout for the monster Inoue, who is already a 4-division champ. Again, he's a 2-division undisputed champ. He's got 2 wins over future Hall of Famer Nonito Donaire. He's, got the win over Stephen Fulton, who was, really looking good at the time. Like, this was a fun matchup to predict and to analyze for a lot of the boxing community when Inoue and Stephen Fulton took to the ring. Some people thought that, Stephen Fulton would have success and might win the fight. So that at the time was seen as like, hey, this is one of the fights of the year to watch. And again, Inoue made that one look totally non-competitive. Tapales, in this case, was much more competitive against Inoue. Even if he only won one round, at least on my scorecard, only one round, he still fought competitively and was competing well, even in the rounds that he was losing. But yeah, Inoue is a bad boy, and he said after the fight that he plans to continue to campaign at super bantamweight. I know that there are a lot of fighters who just want to see him go up to 126. You know, if you look at Inoue's body over the years, he used to be really skinny, right? And when he was fighting at light flyweight, right? That was his earliest years where he first became champ at light flyweight. He was very skinny, was still skinny when he was a junior bantamweight, 115. He started to fill out a little bit, and I thought that he was at his best at 118 perhaps, bantamweight, even though he was just killing it in those lower divisions or those lowest of divisions as well. But then going up to super bantamweight, where he currently is 122 after becoming undisputed at 118, you look at his arms and you see that he's filling out. He looks more muscular. He looks significantly more bulky than he did in the lighter division. So I don't think it would be prudent for him to just hop up again to 126 where he'd be fighting. I mean, he might even have success at 126. I just don't think that it would be best for his body at this time. And I think that he feels the same way. Again, he said after this fight that super bantamweight is the division for him right now, and he plans to show how good he can be at this division. He says that he's going to be even better at this division in 2024, and that's where he plans to campaign. You know, I heard Chris Mannix after the Bam Rodriguez versus Sonny Edwards fight suggest that, you know, maybe not in 2024, but perhaps in 2025, because yes, Bam Rodriguez, you know, was going between 112 and 115, and he just beat Sonny Edwards back down at 112. So now he's going to go up to campaign at 115, but he's going to even have trouble making 115. So 118 feels inevitable for Bam Rodriguez. Chris Mannix, a longtime, you know, Sports Illustrated boxing writer who also has his own, the Chris Mannix Boxing podcast, and obviously he's on the DAZN, most of the DAZN broadcasts as well. But Chris Mannix was suggesting that at some point, maybe in 2025, I might have said 2015. If I did, I meant 2025, that we could potentially see Bam Rodriguez challenging Naoya Inoue. At first, when you think about it, it might sound a little bit crazy, but then when you think of how much difficulty Bam might be having in even making 115 to where it'll be prudent for Bam to go to 118. And then when you consider Bam Rodriguez's reach, his reach is at least as long as Naoya Inoue's. So as time goes on, it might be a palpable fight where it could potentially be a competitive matchup. At this point, I think Inoue, you know, has his way with Bam, but we'll see what Bam looks like at 115 throughout 2024 if they're able to get Bam Rodriguez versus Juan Estrada together. I want to see how Bam does in it, you know, in the first half of 2024, and that'll give us a better indication of whether it's even possible. Because even at 115, Naoya Inoue is 2 divisions up from that at 122. So there's a ways to go from Bam, but I don't think it's totally out of the question. It'll be interesting to see who they match Naoya Inoue up with in the wake of this very impressive win over Tapales and becoming undisputed. MJ Akhmadaliev, you know, just, you know, a year ago, the battle for undisputed in the division would have been Stephen Fulton, who again at the time was holding 2 belts, against MJ Akhmadaliev, who was holding the other 2 belts. But since Inoue obliterated Stephen Fulton and you had Marlon Tapales upset MJ Akhmadaliev taking his 2 belts, well, then the battle of undisputed becomes Naoya Inoue versus Marlon Tapales instead of Fulton versus MJ Akhmadaliev. So Akhmadaliev, since that loss to Tapales, he fought a couple of weeks ago against Kevin Gonzalez, and MJ Akhmadaliev got the 8th round TKO. So maybe depending on how the promotions work it out and so forth, maybe we can get Naoya Inoue versus MJ Akhmadaliev, who again is very alive in that division. Stephen Fulton still needs to return to the ring after that, suffering that loss at the hands of Inoue. So we'll see, you know, what Stephen Fulton does in 2024 and whether he stays in the division or if he goes up to featherweight We'll see what Stephen Fulton does. Other top guys in the division are Luis Neri, who's been on a bit of a tear lately. I would be very curious to see how Luis Neri does against Naoya Inoue. I would obviously favor Inoue, and I'm sure Inoue would be favored heavily. But Luis Neri is probably the next best guy after the guys I've already mentioned. And Luis Neri is also a multiple division champion as well, and his only loss is to Brandon Figueroa, who has since gone up to 126. I would have been interested to see how the pressure of Figueroa and his chin and so forth, how he would have been able to fare against Naoya Inoue. But again, he's up at 126 already, so he's not in this discussion. But there's still Luis Neri. There are the other guys I mentioned, Akhmadaliev and so forth. There's also Sam Goodman, who picked up a win against Rais Aleem in the middle of 2023, like in June of 2023. Sam Goodman earned a split decision over Rais Aleem, who at the time was, surging and had a growing reputation. So there's Sam Goodman, there's still Rais Aleem. And by the way, Sam Goodman has won 2 more fights after beating Rais Aleem. So keep your eye on Sam Goodman as well. So those are mostly the other top guys in the division. But yeah, let me know what you thought of this fight between Naoya Inoue and Marlon Tapales. Again, Tapales really came to fight. He showed his heart. He showed his skill. I thought they came in with a pretty good game plan. I thought he was countering well with his lead hand. Again, keeping that backhand at home throughout most of the fight, and was also going to Naoya Inoue's body very well. But Naoya Inoue, again, proved to be way too much and is now a 2-division undisputed champion. Let me know your thoughts on this one in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Once again, happy holidays.